Okay. Yeah, welcome to BlinkOn. It's really great to see so many familiar and also new faces here in Munich. It's almost like reverse jet lag, because usually if I see you, I'm jet lagged. So, yeah, welcome. It's great to have you here.
By the way, I was told that jet lag is a perfect excuse for me to mess up and say something wrong. I'll just, if you assume, that's the way I'm going for.
So I want to start the conference by giving you like the expected raw data. So according to signups, we're about 250 people here, which is like really amazing. We're almost, like exceeding capacity of this room. And there's a bit more than 2/3 of us are Googlers, but we also have strong presence from our partners, from hardware vendors, and from users, which like website developers, really great. So there's lots of opportunity for interaction and interesting discussions. Amazing. Also, looking back at the last six months, the intents we've seen are steadily growing. So since BlinkOn 3, when we started to track this number, we're basically going up and to the right. There are two things I want to point out. One is that the number of intents to implement is actually going up most, and it's not that we're increasing the speed at which we introduce new web-facing features, but we are just seeing a lot more intents about infrastructure work, like feature work, cleanup work, and that's really also interesting, and I want to encourage that and hope that the number actually goes up more. And the other thing that is new is we have intents to experiment, and that's also like crazy new technology, which I hope we can make much more use of. I think we'll talk later about it a bit more.
Much more.
Another interesting thing is to look at bug health. So since we started to organize a bit more the bug triage process, we managed to go to a ratio of 1.2 of closed versus incoming bugs.
Come on, guys, 1.2, that's awesome, yeah. Right?
So really, everything more than one is good, because it means we kind of survive and are not drowning in new bugs.
We're not drowning, yay!
So we also managed to, in the last 6 months, manage to halve the size of our untriaged backlog. Again, that's really great, like, especially if you see the steady growth of number of incoming bugs. This is all great, but it's important to keep in mind, like, you start a new project or something, please set up a bug triage rotation just so you don't miss incoming or high priority bugs. You can make sure to ship an awesome product.
And the other important thing is to say that, last BlinkOn, we talked about bugs and bug triage and things like this. And it's a very common thing, happens all the time, is that we go, yay, let's do this. And then 2 quarters later, it's like, what were we doing with this thing? But look, it's actually consistent. It's actually going down. Like, things are working. Everybody's pat themselves on the back or whatever, the form of celebration you do.
I mean, so much for raw data. Now, if you look back what we had 6 months ago, there was Flipkart. It was like exciting and new. And
yep, and this was it. And it was like, remember we talked about Flipkart? If you haven't heard about Flipkart by now, in fact, I've seen the meme coming, if you mention Flipkart one more time, type of thing. Does that make sense? Anyway, Samuel Jackson. But look what happened in 6 months. It's pretty crazy. This is really a huge growth. This whole new field of progressive web apps is exploding. It's really, we're seeing really great examples of things. One of the interesting ones, Air Berlin, obviously, from right here in Germany, but also the Washington Post. I highly recommend Washington Post /PWA. It's a great way to introduce anybody to progressive web apps. If I was like, what's progressive web apps? You go, check this out. And they're like, whoa, okay, now I want one of those things. And it's really, it's not just like these partners that we're working with. There's a lot of momentum and a lot of real numbers. So real data is coming back. And we've had several case studies that we now went through and published. And it's actually somewhat unbelievable what kind of great numbers they're getting on the user data, and what kind of, how it helps, conversion and lifts and everywhere, and all these wonderful marketing things that I don't really know anything about. But it's also really cool to see that there's lots of momentum in like the web articles. So there's things popping up everywhere, Twitters and all. There you go. Everything is happening. Things are really great. It's actually, progressive web apps are actually a thing. And one of the interesting things that we've also been observing is that we've always struggled with this, like, how do we deal with this next billion of users coming online in emerging markets? And turns out it's actually a really good fit for these markets, because the phones that come in, typically if you buy a new phone, it's full of apps and there's almost no space left. And so it's very hard. This whole installing apps is like a much larger steps than in like, 4G speeds and things like this. And so progressive web apps work really great, and they fill a really good niche there. And it's actually pretty cool, because most of the development, most of the exciting sites that we're seeing are actually coming out of these regions. And it's really cool. Let's just go do more of that. That sounds amazing. And so clearly it's a thing. And it's also important for us to understand that progressive web apps is just a moniker, right? It's just a thing. Like, remember Ajax? Anybody? I mean, maybe it's not that old, right? It's like, but what Ajax, what it was just like a thing that described what happened when XML HTTP request was introduced and really fully understood. You went to MapQuest, and it was like, okay, MapQuest is great. But then when you went to Google Maps, and you can fly over the earth, and things were just like seamless. And you were like, okay, I see, there's a step, right? You go like, okay, this is a whole new different generation thing. And that's what progressive web apps really are about. They're just a moniker to describe this. And in many cases, it's not really just service worker, right? It's not service worker and push notifications. It's just like a good, nice word to describe all the work that you all have done in the web platform. Because with the mobile web sort of stagnating over the last few years, many CEOs and CTOs have lost sight of things that were happening and are not as excited about this. But now when you kind of bring it back and say, hey, look at this, and there's lots of cool stuff, and you're like, whoa, this is amazing. And in fact, one of the interesting case studies that we've seen is AliExpress, I think, rebuilt their site. And granted, their previous site was pretty sucky on the mobile web. But when they rebuilt it, it actually saw conversion lift in iOS, which is like, what? Hang on, progressive web apps on Safari, mobile Safari. But turns out if you build a great website using good technology and you invest proper amount of effort into it, it benefits everywhere. It's great for everything. So I think it's important for us to hang on to this, and I think we need to celebrate. Everybody go, yay, celebrate. Yes? Yay. Okay, celebrate. All right. But I think it's also important for us to understand that this is we're not done. In fact, far from it. I don't want to go more negative than that. But it's actually really hard to build good web apps still. In fact, all of these developers that are succeeding, on the back of my mind, I know that they're succeeding sometimes despite all of the things that we have on the web platform that are bad. And so we have lots of work to do, and we really need to focus on how do we help? How do we keep sustaining this momentum? Because better web is better, right? It's like, it's good for everything. Let's just try to help. And I try to summarize this in like 3 points, or Jochen and I have 3 simple steps, right? It's just, collect underpants. No, that's a different 3 steps. So you have, basically 3 of them. It's more predictable platform, a more powerful platform, and a faster platform. And we'll try to dive into them right now and look at them one by one. By the way, homage to the previous BlinkOn slide from the previous thing, right? It's all good trying to get it on. So let's look at the more predictable predictable platform. If you imagine web platform or any platform as a decision tree, that a developer, when they start developing this platform, has to go through in order to succeed. If you draw it out, I mean, it's a pretty cool exercise. You probably should do that. Maybe, it'll take years. Maybe we shouldn't do it. But the interesting thing about the web platform is that decision tree is probably orders of magnitude larger than that for pretty much any comparative platform. And you have to make not just decisions like, oh, is this the right thing to use? It's like, does it work on all browsers, right? Does it work the same way on all browsers, right? Does it work on this version of the browser? And there's a lot of interesting, if you go on Twitter and just look at what developers are talking about, some of the things, like there was a really cool PouchDB post from Nolan Lawson, anybody? Familiar with that thing where they were like, okay, here's the code that detects what version of the thing I'm using, or just to get started with the IndexedDB or data storage. And it was fascinating because it's like, okay, in this version they shipped a bug, so I can't use it here. This version has that bug, so I can't do that here. And it's like, you get really, like, I was like, why are people doing this? It's really sad, but that's what it is. This is what we deal with. We ship bugs, and when we ship bugs, we basically make developers' lives harder. And when we make developers' life harder, we slow down the momentum. And I think it's really important to understand that this decision tree is not just complex, it's also incomplete. So some things don't lead to good spaces. Up until very, very recently, if you said, hey, I just want to know if this div is visible on the page, can I do that in a performant way? The web platform would say, no, sorry, you'll have to be slow to do this stuff. It's like, but it's a simple thing to ask, right? And a lot of times it's incoherent. You know, if you look at the specs and things that they say, incoherent is the word for the web platform, right? There's lots of primitives that don't fit with each other. And some things we've invented, it's like, this is new hotness, that's what we're using now. Promises is everything. What about event listeners? What are those things? Do we do those anymore? How about callbacks? Do we do callbacks? Why this thing has callbacks and this one has promises? What happened here? Oh, it's time. You know, it's like, and developer doesn't see that. It's like, oh yeah, it's a rational process. But another thing that is common that happens to us a lot is we design things to meet a lot of use cases, and as a result, some of these higher level primitives end up being very complex. There's a great website, Flexbugs. Anybody familiar with the Flexbugs? Just go read it. It's amazing. Because all it is just documents different places and gotchas where if you just try to use Flexbugs, how deep dark can you go into the weird places? Because Flexbox is actually really hard and really complex. Maybe we shouldn't do things like this anymore. I don't know. And you know, Philip is laughing because there's lots of those things. It's not just one. There's lots of different things like this. And so really what we need to do is we need to sort of start saying, look, this is our top priority. I don't know if it's like a top priority, but it's like one of the top 3 priorities, is let's reduce the inconsistencies and gotchas, the crazy pants and foot guns that we have on the platform. It's sort of like working all the cruft that accumulated out of the system and making the platform more predictable. And by the way, you should definitely go, if you're interested in this platform problem, if this is something that's near and dear to your heart, come see Rick and Philip's talk. It's in this room, so it's going to be sometime today. It's going to be amazing. But also, in addition to dealing with things in the past, we also need to make sure that things will land well. And they don't end up being crazy pants and foot guns of the future, right? And so to try to deal with this problem, we're introducing origin trials, which is a new framework for experimenting with the features. That's what intent to experiment really means. It's a really cool platform. It's a really cool new thing. So Ian Cleland is going to present on this. Please come see his talk. It's going to be great. I don't see him right now, but you know, there he is. Like, that's the person that's going to tell you all about origin trials. It's really cool.
So the second of our 3 points was that we need a more powerful platform. And of course, we need to unlock power in a responsible way. It's one of the key principles of the web platform, that it's ephemeral and should be secure. And so what do I mean by more powerful? If you're a web developer and you want to do an amazing and smooth web app, and you come into the situation where you think, oh, I wish only there was like a way to do X, or there was a feature Y. And so really what we need to do, we need to reduce how often that happens. Like we need to understand better what web developers need and find ways to provide this. So in the last year, we've finally shipped what we can consider a bit of the foundations of progressive web apps. It's namely service worker and push notifications, and really just close the feature gap between native and what the web can provide. Not entirely, but it made it a lot smaller. And so at this point, what we need to do is we need to take this foundation and build on it. So, like, figure out what is missing, build those things, but also take the existing things we have in the platform and polish them. Like as Dimitri pointed out earlier, that there are like lots of gotchas and rough edges, and so it's also important and worthwhile to continue to invest in cleaning that stuff up. So
there's a really interesting point there, is that I don't know if you see there is like distinct long tail of things that's happening. And so at some point you go like, do we add every feature that developer needs to the platform? Does that seem a little maybe excessive? We need to run on mobile devices. So there's Jeffrey Yaskin. Where is he? There he is. He's going to do a talk on how to potentially address this situation of long tail of the features. Come see his talk as well.
Yeah, and so it looks a bit like, since we have push notification service worker, we're almost done, but there's still also bigger things that are missing, and I just want to point out 2 examples. So one example is a monetization. So for a website, it is important to make money. Like, I mean, that's one of the reasons, or one of the big reasons people build websites. And really what we need to provide a way for a website to charge users for services or for goods other than just having ads. And it needs to be convenient, it needs to be secure. On the other hand, as a user, I don't want to have to trust everybody with my credit card details and like, you know, type it in on a small phone screen. But also I need a convenient and a secure way to pay for goods and to subscribe to stuff on the web. So we are committed to work in the web payments working group and find a solution there which will hopefully solve this problem. A similar example is identity. Again, you don't want to have every website to reinvent login, password, store a database that then is leaked, or, you know, like have a semi-secure thing that forces you to type a really cumbersome password which you forget on your phone. But instead, we actually already shipped Credential Manager API, which addresses this problem and hopefully will continue to close the feature gap. So these are just 2 examples that, as Dimitri pointed out, there's like a really long tail of stuff we can fix. There's lots of stuff we should fix. But another important part for the platform, and this is the 3rd pillar, is that we need a performant platform, a fast platform. And it's important to point out that just raw speed optimizations don't necessarily make the platform feel faster. So of course there's both, right? So we need to be fast, but it's really important that we are being perceived as being fast. And the user perception is not necessarily changed by making one thing just as fast as possible. But just let me give you an example. If your website smoothly animates at 60 frames per second, it's very reactive, except for sometimes. So sometimes it stutters, or like the user touches an element and nothing happens for half a second. Then the website will feel slow. Like, even though most of the time it comfortably fits into our rail bounds. And so if you want to fix this problem, it doesn't help to make the fast path even faster. What you really have to do, you have to figure out what is the worst case, what is like the edge cases that still might happen from time to time, and make them just good enough so that, like, in the worst case, you're still within the rail limits. And of course, there's the developer part, but there's also the engine part. So really, it is up to us to enable websites to actually hit the rail limits always, and not just in the happy case. What happens, however, if you run on a device where even the fast path is already struggling with rail? So, for example, a low-end or a mid-end phone, and it is a fact that a large part of our user base, and is a growing part of our user base, is actually running on such devices. And in that situation, we have to do trade-offs. So it's very important to also keep in mind that you have to do this trade-off. So if you just optimize for one thing, so for example, say, oh, it's a low-end device, so I need to use as little memory as possible, what might happen is that you constantly have to recompute stuff that's very expensive, which you would otherwise have cached. So yes, you optimized for memory in that case, but overall, you ruined the user experience. And also talking about rail, you have to be aware that rail is not giving you the complete UX. So again, if you run on a low-end device, and so you need more resources for the foreground tab, the best thing you can do for rail is kill all the background tabs. Because then the foreground tab has all the resources, it's fine, it's running smoothly, but when the user then finally switches the tab, they will see that it's dead. It needs to reload, and it will be very unhappy. So it's not really a great UX, right? And so there's a trade-off space. We have to be aware of this trade-off space, and it's important to figure out a good balance. So one of the talks later is from Ross over there about the new interpreter in V8, and one of the things it tries to address is exactly the low-end segment. So how should we get faster, right? It's really important for us that we build a platform that developers aren't disappointed with, like that they don't get to 80%, and then if they try to get the last 20%, it just doesn't work. And at the same time, it's also really important to not disappoint our users. So they say, oh, all these fancy progressive web apps, but really, if you then try to use it as and on a regular basis, it janks all the time. So really, we need to concentrate on not disappointing people. And already like a few years ago, we started to realize we just can't rely on hardware getting faster and faster, right? So like there are also constraints like power that throttle the growth of how we get faster and bigger hardware with more cores. So instead, we have to be smarter with the resources we have. And that really means it doesn't matter necessarily that much whether you can do some task in like half a second or a quarter second. Like really what you need to do is the user touches the screen, you need to drop whatever you're doing and respond to that touch event, right? I mean, there are cases where it's important to have the raw processing power. And like the web is a huge thing. There are many web apps that rely on having fast computation. And it's also important for us to continue to work in this area. But really, so one thing we should learn and continue to do is that we have to optimize for this case that we need to react. So we try to put together a small plan of action.
It's very simple. It's just do these 3 things and you're done. It's
like we'll come up with a long list of 3 things you have to do. But really, the first thing is like if you write a new feature or you're looking at existing code or something, you're thinking about what you do, try to think, how can I do this work incrementally? Chop it up in chunks, right? So like your first step shouldn't necessarily be to make it really fast. Your first step should be to think about, how can I do this in an incremental fashion? Then the next step is make those chunks fast. So it's still the raw speed optimization that's like a bread and butter thing that's important. So step 1, chop it up. Step 2, make each of the individual chunks really tiny as possible. And then the third thing, and that's probably the most challenging thing, is we need to be smart about when and how to run these chunks, right? So we've seen with Blink Scheduler that there's like a lot of performance we can gain by being smart about when to run which task. When we have the knowledge, like we need to paint frames or we are reacting to an input event, and making use of that knowledge lets us get much faster without actually getting faster in total. We're just smart about doing the work. And another thing you can ask yourself is like, does all the work necessarily need to be done on the main thread? Of course, you have to keep in mind that like on a low-end device, you might just not have more than 2 cores or 1 core. So you can't just like create thread pools for everything. But if you chunk up the stuff, we at least have the choice to decide where to run stuff. And that's really the key to get to a smooth and predictable platform.
So by the way, Jochen, have you noticed that this looks surprisingly like a recipe? It's like, chunk things up and then put the right things, ingredients, right spices, and be smart about how you cook it. It's maybe like a soup recipe, maybe like a blink onion soup recipe. Yeah, huh? All right, so come see Elliot's talk later today, which is later tomorrow, right? Tomorrow, yeah. So anyway, did you like my segue? I just came up with that.
Take it off. So yeah, really, this is the important to keep in mind about like being faster by being smarter, also by being faster, but we want both.
Come see Nat and Annie's talk on this.
Right. So Nat and Annie will talk about building a smarter engine.
Show who you are so that people know who you are.
Also in the main room. Today, I think. Yeah.
Today, yes.
Right. Okay.
And as we try to endeavor on this, I mean, it's a simple recipe, but y'all know that this is actually incredibly hard because it really is re-engineering the engine and doing it in flight. Remember that awesome commercial where there was like a rebuilding a plane or building a plane in the sky or something like this? That's what we're doing. It's amazing. But as we do this, we need to also make sure that we give developers, web developers, an opportunity to help and to do the right things as well. And I think the messaging here is fairly straightforward, right? Lean on the web platform to do the work. In fact, today, if you look at it, there's now plenty of things that are available that you don't have to write code for. And in fact, if we go into this whole smarts route, we probably will know the right time to run this if you use the web platform feature rather than to write your own version of it in JavaScript. Which leads me to the next one, with writing less code. If you write less code, less stuff to load over the network, less stuff to run, everybody wins. And again, same thing from the last slide is chunk your work. How do we give developers the opportunity to chunk the work better? And especially, we're talking about the main thread. These are all hard, and we need to understand this is a trade-off. If I just give this to a developer and say, just do this, it's very easy. No, the predictability of the platform is hard. It's still a pressing problem. So we need to understand that this is actually a really complex issue. And we're not ready to answer all the questions today, but we need to strive toward it. And how do we go there? I think understanding how to do this at scale is somewhere along the lines of the answer. I want to mention a thing called Lighthouse that we're working on. It's very early on, but we're very excited about it. Is this how I'm supposed to say it? Very early on, but we're very excited about it. It's essentially some sort of a tool that allows you to make the idea of the feeling fast measurable, and then be able to give this to developers so that they can integrate it into their workflow or check it once or put it in continuous integration, whatever you want. So this is actually a talk on progressive web metrics Paul is going to give, hopefully. Paul? Maybe anybody. There's going to be a talk on that. Trust me. Progressive web metrics is the one that deals with, and maybe Nat and Annie will mention that as well. So there's some really interesting work happening there. Also, we're still, like I said, we don't have all the answers. And in many cases, the answer is, we don't know. So we really need to make sure we fill the gaps with the performance-friendly features. And so one of the interesting things here is Houdini, and you really need to go see that talk if you're interested in building features. By the way, who here is not interested? No, I'm just kidding. Okay, it's a really great talk on Houdini and the future of the web platform. It's really cool. Come see it. I think there's like 3 people are going to. Ian, Shane, Eddie are going to give this talk. And I've seen the slides. It's amazing. You have to go see it. Overselling? Maybe. Okay. And finally, in the cases where the things have gone really, really wrong, we do have this new magic weapon, the sword that cuts everything. A little too sharp, maybe, for some things. And this is the idea of the user agent interventions, where we have to step up and say, look, developer, you have failed. We need to deliver good or somewhat acceptable user experience to the user. So we're going to do something about it. Please come see Stefan and Ojan's talk today. And also you'll find out how to use emoji in your slide decks so that for the future. And you'll find out why there is a zombie in a plant in the slide. So it's like, it's really cool.
It's also important to point out that usually we say the web developer, but it's not a single entity, right? So even if it's a group of web developers and they really grok like this progressive web app thing and build a beautiful thing, they might, in the end of the process, then have to include third-party content that just does not play nicely. And so in that situation, basically we have to make a call of judgment in the browser and intervene.
It's a really challenging problem space, but really exciting, very exciting. Anyway, am I at the end? No, it's still happening. And I think to try and round this all up is that we really need to focus. We don't have a good answer or a project or somebody working on it like, oh, I know, Bob's working on this. We need to figure out how to tell a coherent story. Web platform is really cool in that there's a lot of developers and a lot of users. It's also really weird because there's not a guide to how to build a web app, right? Like, is there a place where you can go and say, like, start here? these follow the steps. There's the beginning of the decision tree. Remember we talked about decision trees? And here's a well-lit path that takes you to the right spot. There's not a thing like this. And it's really fascinating because, it's every other platform has one. There's always a starter guide. And I think this goes beyond the starter guide, really. It goes into us understanding how the platform things fit together. Because sometimes team in Office A works on not one feature, team in Office B works on another feature. They don't talk. Features may interact. Our developer, they look different. The shape of the API looks different. So how does it fit? So this is a really important thing. And if you're interested in tackling this problem, feel free to suggest a talk. And that will be one of those things that is new and exciting. And I think finally, last but not least, I want to say that throughout all of this conversation, the thing that should be on the back of y'all's heads is that we have to strive to build just a really good product. Platform improvements are great, and predictability of the platform is great, but the thing is that if we lower the quality bar, or if we let it down at some point, or even accidentally, and ship regressions, these things tend to really bake into the platform very quickly. And so bugs that you ship are magnified because now developers have to work around them, and now you might not be able to remove them anymore. And so really, it's in a way, building platforms is harder than just shipping products, because you actually are one order removed from the actual user, and that means that the developer will take freedoms over how to deal with your problems. And I think that's really important. And I think this is where the whole idea of 1.2 ratio of closing bugs is super important.
So it's important to point out that it is different from having a not well-designed or incoherent APIs. What we're really talking about here is like software bugs, because those are the worst. Like a poorly spec'd API, it's still spec'd, right? But like where the bugs are, it's completely random to website authors. Right. So building excellent product is really about like our day-to-day work. Make sure that it's a high-quality product we ship.
And with that, I just want to recap. Very quick thing. Predictable, powerful, faster. Used to be 4 things. We've combined some of them, so now there's just 3. Maybe on BlinkOn 7, there'll be just 2. We'll see what happens. And thanks.
Okay.